Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and we have a special offer for all you Patreon subscribers today. You can own the entire back catalog of Awesome Movie Year. All you have to do is eat Josh's corpse.
Jason getting into some spoiler territory, I guess, for this movie. I don't know if you can really do that, but
no such thing as spoilers for this one, Josh.
It's just you could just it's like a 52 pickup, right? You could just shuffle all the elements of it and pick them back up in any order.
I thought that Josh, it would be nicer to have him eat your corpse than to say, Josh, stop fucking that boy.
Okay. I know that you made them eat my corpse rather than yours, but really, if you want to track with the film, it would be your own corpse because it's the guy's will after he dies.
But it's Dave's Patreon, so maybe they should be eating Dave's corpse.
We're gonna decline from any corpse eating here in this episode of our season on the films of 1969. We are here at the Venice Film Festival. This is sometimes our Sundance Film Festival episode, but when the Sundance Film Festival has not yet been founded, we will take a look at other festivals. We've been in Venice a bunch of times before, and this film is the winner of the Pasinetti Award for Best Italian Film at the 1969 festival. It is Fellini Satyricon from director Federico Fellini. During this period, there were no official awards at the Venice Film Festival, but this was a sort of third-party award given out, and so this is de facto the top award at this festival, and it makes sense that Federico Fellini would win a Venice Film Festival award, one of the most notable Italian filmmakers, and one that we've talked about before in our 1953 season with his... Exactly. With his much more straightforward, easy to understand film, I Vitelloni.
Josh, the Sundance Film Festival used to be the U.S. Film Festival. What do you have against them? Why don't we ever choose any winners from them?
I don't know when the U.S. Film Festival was founded either, but it was not notable really until it became Sundance and Robert Redford came in and made it into what it was in the early 80s. As I think we probably talked about. I want to say 84. Was that the first year of Sundance when we did that?
Which we covered,
Right, exactly. That's what I'm saying. We covered it in our season that year and talked about how it became Sundance. So I don't know if there's even much documentation about what played at or won the U.S. Film Festival and when that began. So Venice a much bigger deal at this time. It is.
Certainly. And Josh, 2 Satyricon films in 1969. The other one also named The Degenerates, Italian film from Gianluigi Polidoro. So that's why they called this one Fellini Satyricon. They tried to sue to get the other one to stop production, but it didn't work. Anyway, the good news for that film is that when Fellini Satyricon was released in the U.S., the distributor also bought the rights to Satyricon for like $1 million to just shelve it, to not let it out before Fellini Satyricon.
Yeah, and it's weird that they sued because, of course, these are both based on certainly public domain material, this ancient Roman text that only partially survives. That's a sort of epic prose poem by Gaius Petronius. So it's like if 2 people decided to make a movie out of Macbeth or something, right? They're not going to be able to sue each other. Well, anyone is able to do that.
Yes, except Macbeth is one of the most well-known pieces of literature from one of the most famous authors of all time. As you mentioned, Petronius, this is the only surviving poem or story that's ever been from him, and it's all in fragments, right? So that's why Fellini filled in with wacky situations.
Right. But it's still freely available to anyone to adapt. There's no Petronius's descendants don't hold the rights to it. So
you're onto something, Josh. Petronius, Satyricon, Blood and Honey.
Yeah, you could.
I mean, this is a horror movie in some ways anyway.
Yeah, it is. It is. Are we ready for the Petronius cinematic universe or something like that? I don't know.
That's what we need, more cinematic universes.
We do indeed. So, as you said, of course, this far overshadowed that other film. Fellini was a major, important filmmaker at this time, and this movie was successful, grossing $8 million worldwide on its budget of $3 million. It won that Pasinetti Award at Venice. It was submitted by Italy as its best foreign language film selection at the Oscars. It was not nominated for that. However, Fellini was nominated for Best Director, and the movie was nominated for the Best Foreign Language Film at the Golden Globes. So, to me, it's surprising a bit that this movie would have been popular with audiences, because whether you like it or not, it's not accessible, really.
I think that's totally fair. I'm like, what would this be if it was made today? Where would it go? Like if, a huge, like, what if Christopher Nolan, Nolan Satyricon, right? Yeah. Where would that go if it was this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of something like Damien Chazelle's Babylon, maybe, which is more accessible than this, but is the kind of thing where it's like, here's a filmmaker who's popular and acclaimed and has all this goodwill and is able to get a bunch of money to make just this sort of sprawling, indulgent, crazy movie and use that goodwill. And but this is definitely way weirder than that. So I don't even know what.
And I know they had money. There was a budget. Obviously, it's a Fellini film, but it was much more, I think, in check. And they saw returns on their investment, as opposed to the fine folks who invested in Babylon. Sorry, right. Brad Pitt.
Babylon Hive, rise up.
Yeah, I mean, and Fellini too is, I mean, this may be, I haven't seen every Fellini film, but I feel like this may be Fellini's weirdest film or his least accessible film. But certainly even his most popular movies from the past, like 8.5 and La Dolce Vita, have these fantastical, surreal elements to them. And so maybe people were more primed to expect something like this from Fellini than they would from a Christopher Nolan.
I watched it with you guys because we're all Vitelloni.
We are. We did not do that, but we are in spirit, at least, Vitelloni. So critics, too, were maybe slightly divided by this, or certainly found it challenging. But I mean, I feel like this is the kind of movie, and I think maybe our reactions mirror this, where it is in many ways probably a love or hate kind of thing. It's so out there that either you're completely on its wavelength or you're going to completely reject it. So the positives were pretty positive.
Right. So if you're a listener, now's the time to write down which one of us you predict loved it. And I think the answer will fall in line if you've listened to past podcasts from Awesome Movie Year.
I think so. We're not always that predictable, but maybe in this case we are. So Roger Ebert, though, he was one who did love this movie. He had it as his number 10 film of 1969. And he said, Federico Fellini describes his Fellini Satyricon as a science fiction film, but one in which we journey to the past rather than to the future. Directors are notoriously unreliable as sources of opinion about their own movies, but in this case, I think Fellini is dead right. His film is a fantastical journey to a pre-Christian Rome that resembles no civilization that ever was, in heaven or on earth. And it is a masterpiece. Some will say it is a bloody, depraved, disgusting film. Indeed, people by the dozens were escaping from the sneak preview I attended. But Fellini Satyricon is a masterpiece all the same, and films that dare everything cannot please everybody.
Fellini described the film with this quote, Josh. His goal was to eliminate the borderline between dream and imagination, to invent everything and then to objectify the fantasy, to get some distance from it in order to explore it as something all of a piece and unknowable.
Sure. And that was probably a success. I guess. Yeah. I mean, this movie theoretically takes place in ancient Rome, but as Ebert points out, it really takes place in a sort of fantastical dream world that only has passing resemblance to what it might have really been like in ancient Rome. And there's nothing really here that looks like a city per se to me. I mean, they're just sort of traveling across this this random landscape. And because it's based on the fragments of that Petronius work, it's also fragmented as a movie, right? Things happen and then suddenly we're somewhere else with different people and we don't know how we got there or why, and we never find out.
Yeah, one movie it brought me back to that we've covered, which did take place in cities, was The Adventures of Baron Munchausen. But you could definitely feel some Terry Gilliam-ish vibes in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like even Gilliam has more plot coherence than and character development than this film does. But that's fair.
Yeah, I hear you. I think, the idea of this work, like it only existed in fragments, gave Fellini all that freedom to kind of fill it in however he wanted. And whatever we feel about it, I think he did what he wanted with the film.
Absolutely, he did. And I'm with Ebert in the sense that, of course, you're going to be this bold. And I think it's great that a filmmaker here where Fellini was really, really famous and really, really successful at this period, and he's still taking these big, big risks. And I did not like this movie, but I appreciate any filmmaker who makes that kind of leap when they don't necessarily have to. And maybe it would be easier or safer for them not to, but they're still pushing boundaries of their art, much like Damien Chazelle did with Babylon, which I also don't like.
Or your boy Iñárritu with his Netflix movie, Look at Me, I'm Iñárritu. Here's
I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to extend him the same credit for that movie, Bardo. I'm not a Iñárritu fan at all.
Even I didn't like that movie.
Yeah, see? So Vincent Canby in the New York Times was also a big fan of this. He said, "There is no evidence that Fellini is particularly interested in the problem of moral depravity in ancient Rome. And this, I think, is one of the difficulties many people will have in accepting the cool, often outrageous extravagances of the film. They want to know why. What the hell has this to do with us? The film is a single vision, presented almost entirely without editorial comment. It unfolds as if it were a narrative movie, but the effect is that of a purely descriptive film, like a travelogue through an unknown galaxy. Satyricon is not an easy or pleasant movie. It is totally without sentiment and a sense of joy, except for the joy that comes in watching Fellini, exuberant genius that he is, transfiguring everything in what once was called the known world."
And Josh, let me add on to that from a quote from Fellini biographer Parker Tyler, who declared it the most profoundly homosexual movie of all time, in all history, is what he said. But yes.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised at how sort of upfront it is about the homosexual relationships of these characters. But on the other hand, it's depicting a period of time when the idea of like being gay or straight didn't really exist.
That's how I felt. I didn't feel like it was homosexual. It was just sexually fluid, right?
Right.
I mean, they're having sex with men, women. They're worshiping a hermaphrodite who they murder by accident. There's a lot going on here.
There is, right. And the idea in this period was that, sexuality was just something that was expressed in different ways with different people. And there were no labels of identity for anybody per se. But on the other hand, right, in 1969, there were those labels and people would regard it that way. So in that sense, Fellini is doing this deliberately to make it, quote, a homosexual movie. And so that guy is not necessarily entirely wrong.
I mean, we weren't alive then, obviously, but I wonder if this would have, like, if it was released today, the same backlash as like Cuties had, right? Where people are taking it literally and Fellini's like, go fuck those boys. And everyone's protesting it as opposed to it being the piece of art that it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sort of surprised. I mean, at least I didn't read anything about any kind of protests or objections to this film. And maybe because, again, Fellini is this kind of international art house director and he's not Steven Spielberg or whatever, although I guess that's too early for Spielberg or, some major
a couple
studio.
Of years behind.
I am. Yeah, no, that's wrong. But a major studio director.
But also I think part of it is that it's 69, right? And then we're talking about, French New Wave and international cinema and the beginning of New Hollywood and Easy Rider. And I think there might have been a more vociferous support of going balls to the wall on quote unquote, maybe mainstream movies.
Right, maybe, but I mean, on the other hand, you get something like Bonnie and Clyde, or like we just talked about, The Wild Bunch, and that's violence rather than sex. But still, those were big studio movies, and there was huge backlash about the way that they pushed boundaries. So maybe if this had been that kind of film, there would have been more of a response like that.
Yeah, Butch and Sundance should have just fucked each other, and then no one would have cared.
I mean, there's definitely some undertones there, as I think we discussed.
In this one, there are tones, overtones,
definitely
in your face tones, up your butt tones,
right? No question about what is really what is the intention there. So finally, Pauline Kael in the New Yorker did not like this. She said, "The film is full of cautionary images of depravity that seem to come out of the imagination of a Catholic schoolboy. An unconscionable number of performers stick out their evil tongues at us, and there are leering cripples, fat freaks with hideous grins, and so on. Fellini draws upon his master entertainer's feelings for the daydreams of the audience, and many people find this film eerie, spellbinding, and even profound. Essentially, though, it's just a hip version of Cecil B. DeMille's The Sign of the Cross, also a photogenic demonstration of the highly dubious proposition that godlessness is lawlessness. And it's less entertaining than DeMille's kitsch, maybe because no one is given a role to play. Fellini is the only star. He uses Petronius and other classic sources as the basis for a movie that is one long orgy of eating, drinking, cruelty, and copulation. We seem to be at a stoned circus, where the performers go on, whether we care or not. And for a work that is visual, if it is anything, the film leaves disappointingly few visual impressions."
Josh, talking about those fatzos with grins on them, did you know that Richard Simmons was one of those fatzos with a grin on them?
I did see that. I mean, I didn't see it in the movie. I didn't notice it in the movie. I mean, he just is in the background somewhere, but I read that he had appeared, as well as in a later Fellini movie, The Clowns. So good for Richard Simmons.
I watched I didn't recognize him there because he was much bigger than we had seen, when he was famous, but he's in the background and he's like playing a harp and grinning, and he's fat then. And that's good. Right. Good for him indeed, Josh.
Yeah. I wonder what would have happened in a further Simmons Fellini collaboration in the future.
Yes, sweating to the well, they're sweating to a lot of things in this one. So
they sure are. So I mean, I think one thing that Pauline Kael points out here that I definitely thought is the idea that there's not really any character of any kind. I mean, there are main characters, but they're like archetypes rather than people. There's no one here that feels like a person who is has a purpose or has any sort of interior life, that this is all just like, look at all this craziness. And that to me was partially what was so exhausting about it, was that I didn't care about what was happening to these people because they barely even seemed like people. And I think that's something that she points out, that I don't know that Fellini is not a failure, because I don't know that he's aiming for that. But to me, that was something that made it difficult to care about the movie.
I think that the poet, who has a name I can't pronounce, was the most pronounced character in the film.
The sort of tragic poet who dies, or the rich guy who fancies himself a poet?
Well, I mean, the rich guy, that was a clear character, but I was going to say the tragic poet who dies.
Right. I mean, it's not like there aren't people who are identifiable characters. It's just like they didn't seem to me to have any sort of interior life or any sort of humanity that I could grab onto within the context of the film.
It was certainly debauched.
That it was. And I don't have a problem with that. I just feel like within the debauchery, I need to care about somebody and what happens to them, or even be able to follow it. I mean, the fragmented nature of it means that even if you're sort of like starting to get invested in Colpius, the main character, and his, goals or whatever, then suddenly we jump to some other location where he's doing some other thing and he has different goals and ideas, and you've lost whatever you might have been holding on to previously.
Yeah, I mentioned Terry Gilliam. I think you could also put like Monty Python, the Holy Grail, as like kind of a more sturdy version of structured piece like this.
Yeah, and this isn't funny. I mean, I don't know that it's even attempting humor particularly, but it definitely did not seem funny to me at all.
Don't take it so literal, man. I was just talking about structure.
Right? Okay, no, but I mean, I think if you structure it that way, I think what I mean is if you're making essentially like a series of sketches,
It works better as
it'd be funny. It should make it funny, yeah. So obviously we had all seen Fellini's I Vitelloni, but Jason, you hadn't seen this one, had you?
No, I didn't know about this one, and that was okay with me.
And I'm sure we talked about this in that other episode, but have you seen other Fellinis?
I think I have. I'd have to look up. I haven't seen the most famous ones, but I feel like I've seen some other ones. But what do I know? I'm an idiot. Go on, Josh.
Okay, yeah. Well, I didn't watch any new. I didn't explore Fellini any further for this episode. But I had relatively recently, I don't know if it was before or after we did that episode, but I had rewatched for an article 8.5, and I had also watched Nights of Cabiria. And I really am not a fan of 8.5, but Nights of Cabiria is probably my favorite Fellini. And I think like I Vitelloni, it's good because it's much more, to me, it's much more grounded. And the main character there is like the opposite of what I was just saying. She's someone that we really follow and really get to know, and we understand her emotions, and we care about what happens to her. And I feel like he's good at that. And those more grounded Fellini movies appeal to me more. But overall, I feel like just Fellini is probably not for me.
I have to correct myself, Josh, because I'm looking up Fellini's filmography. This is a real blind spot for me. I've only seen the two that we've covered here.
Well, like I said, I don't know that I would recommend a deep dive on Fellini. Although, I mean, of course, he's a major international filmmaker, but most of the stuff I've seen of his has kind of left me cold. But Nights of Cabiria would be the one that I would say is worth checking out. So, Dave, again, other than I Vitelloni, had you explored Fellini?
No, this was one on my list that I was like hoping to get to. I had, heard its reputation, but no, these are the only two that I've seen so far.
Well, I think you probably have a more favorable inclination to explore more Fellini than the two of us do.
I think so.
Yeah. So anything else about the background of this movie you want to mention, Jason?
Josh, I have a special guest reviewer that I got a quote from my dad, Mark, who said, when I said, hey, we're watching Fellini Satyricon, he said, ooh, that's a good one to watch on LSD. And then he followed it by saying, I'm pretty sure Fellini was on LSD while he made this film.
Fair.
That is a fair assessment. Has your dad watched this movie on LSD, or was he just speculating about that?
I don't know if I should ask him if he's watched it on LSD. I know he went to Disneyland on LSD once, so that's exciting for him.
Yeah.
He said the parade was very strange. Yeah. So, but my dad is a film lover and studied a lot of European film in college. So he was, once I brought this up, he was on it.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely imagine this as a kind of midnight movie in the 70s that college students would get high and go watch. It seems perfectly tailored for that.
Yeah.
So we'll come back in a moment and talk more of our general thoughts on Fellini Satyricon. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about Venice Film Festival award winner Fellini Satyricon. And should we attempt to recount the plot of this movie? Is there even a plot?
You're on your own here. I'll just sit back and listen.
So, I mean, there are some central characters, right? I mean, I mentioned earlier Encolpius, played by Martin Potter. And he is sort of frenemies, I guess we could say, with Schiltis, played by Hiram Keller.
Lovers, friends, enemies, fighters.
All these things. They start the movie seeming to be enemies because they are fighting over Guiton, played by Max Born, who is is the lover to both of them. He is the young man. I don't know how old the actor was. Hopefully he was of age when he was in this film.
But the character is probably a minor, I'd say, right?
Yeah, probably like 16-ish or something like that, we would imagine. And they're sort of fighting over him because Ascyltos has stolen him and then sold him off. And see, this is what I'm saying. It sets up the idea, right, that Encolpius, who is our main character, is in love with Giton. And his whole goal is to get him back and for them to be together. And a lot of the movie in the early part of it is about that. He goes to this sort of weird troupe of actors where Giton has been sold off, and he tries to get him back, and then they're together, and they wander through this weird tableau of like a whorehouse kind of place, I guess, and then they are back in Encolpius's quarters.
I don't know, man. It all looked good though.
Yeah, no, it does. It does. I mean, they clearly, I mean, this was mostly done in Cinecittà Studios, the famous Italian studios. Clearly, they built all of these crazy elaborate sets that look cool, the costumes, everything like that.
One thing you're talking about, Josh, that I think we brought up before that you had kind of mentioned as far as like the structure here, you alluded to it, is like, if you just left for 15 minutes and came back, it wouldn't change your understanding of this film pretty much at any point in time, which is detrimental.
Right. No, I think so. And again, it's very episodic, but I felt like for a while I could at least hold on to the idea of like, okay, it's sort of this love story, right? It's this guy and he's in love with Giton. He'll do anything to get him for them to be together. And Giton seems kind of indifferent to the whole deal, right? And especially when Ascyltos comes back and they're fighting, and he's like, let's divide up our property. And they ask Giton, who do you want to go with? And he chooses Ascyltos, the guy who sold him off. And then they leave, and Encolpius is all depressed. And so there's something there. But maybe halfway-ish through the movie, Giton just disappears, and we never see him again. And Encolpius never even mentions him again. And so it was like, okay, well, I guess that wasn't important, or we didn't care about that. And I feel like that's sort of emblematic of everything. Like none of it it means anything. The characters don't have any motivations that we can latch onto or understand. And even the one thing that it seemed like was central to it just disappears.
Yeah, yep. I'm trying to like, maybe he got over him and just wanted to have another sex slave, but I don't really have answers for anything in this film, Josh. So.
Right. I mean, and I don't expect you to. Obviously, the film itself is not providing answers or expecting you to create answers per se. But that was frustrating to me because if it's basically just this guy kind of wanders through different adventures. I mean, I feel like that's overstating the amount of events that occur in this film. It's just sort of like tableaus almost. You know, we see a lot of these frescoes that are these like static illustrations of stuff, and I felt like that the movie itself was very static in that way.
Well, and we know for a fact that you don't mind movies that kind of wander and meander. You did pick Smiley Face, right? So I hear what you're saying, where it was tough for you to latch on to anything. And then I think that might have been why I brought up the poets. Maybe that was the more memorable stuff, like as far as like they're a little bigger, they're a little more boisterous, and like you could at least understand their relationship and the confrontation between them.
Yeah, I mean, and they do, the one poet comes back. I mean, we have the big scene where they go to this rich guy's sort of estate or whatever, and there's this giant banquet, and Encolpius has been brought there by the poor poet, and the rich guy he fancies himself a poet, and the poor poet kind of resents him because he's like, oh, your poetry sucks, and you know, people just like it because you're rich or whatever. And then the poor poet ends up dying, but we do see the rich guy come back later on, and he is helping Encolpius with his erectile dysfunction, which is a very key goal it's like the climax of the film is, can Encolpius get it up again or not?
By giving him some good soft whippings on the fanny.
Right. And that doesn't help, but eventually he is sent to some sort of
island, maybe with a sex goddess or whatever.
Right. And he finally achieves his success there. And this is how sort of like not seriously I was taking this movie at that scene when he has finally recovered his mojo. All I could think of was Cabin Boy. These pipes are clean.
It's funny, we keep bringing up strange like connections that we've already done. Like, I mentioned the hermaphrodite that they worship, and I'm like, hey, that kind of reminds me of Nelson de la Roca from the Island of Dr. Moreau, his tiny sidekick there and everything. So
right.
I think really what it shows is we're just trying to latch on to anything to like connect to it and understand it. And I mean, honestly, I watched the movie and if you were like, explain it to me, I would have been like, nope. I did have to go and read the Wikipedia summary, and it was still confusing. But I think, to me, that's hard is when like it was really, really hard to follow, even structurally or not. It was just still difficult.
Yeah, I mean, I think I did the same. I read the summary, and I feel like I didn't miss anything in the sense that there wasn't anything in the summary where I was like, oh, wait, that's what that was. But right, it still doesn't make sense. I mean, you can see and absorb every like activity and event that happens in the movie, and it still doesn't make sense. And I don't think that that's like counter to what Fellini is going for, right? He isn't trying to get it to make all logical sense, right? It's supposed to be dreamlike. It's supposed to be fragmented. It's supposed to be disorienting. And I mean, and I like you said, Jason, I feel like that's all fine. And there are lots of movies that do these kinds of things that I like. But if that's what's going on, I need something there. I need a character that I can follow and care about. And if the character is disoriented, if the character is confused, I can be there along with them. I need some humor. I mean, even the aesthetics of it, like, I think Pauline Kael is overstating the idea that none of the visuals make an impression. But on the other hand, I feel like at the beginning of the movie, I was like, wow, this looks really cool. And then it just kind of continues to look the same way, and that's okay. But the visual impressions were lessened to me as it went on.
I wonder if that's just because you were less invested in the film as it went on.
And that may be true, but I feel like there are maybe some movies where they look amazing and they don't make sense and the characters don't really have any depth to them, but the visuals are so astounding that I can be attentive the entire time. And this wasn't the case here.
Maybe, Josh, it's a reflection of your fear of commitment. You start out into something and then you just kind of push yourself away from it.
Yeah, maybe. Much like in Colpius, just dropping Guitone there and not even mentioning him again.
Do you want us to whip you in the fanny, Josh?
I don't know. It might help. Well, I guess it wouldn't, right? It didn't help poor Encolpius. He needed to go find the sex goddess in order to finally get there.
Yeah, but, different strokes for different folks.
Strokes indeed, yes. I mean, one of the things like that I did wonder about that, going back to the idea of, is this, the gayest movie of all time or whatever, right? The moment when Encolpius has his difficulties is when he has not defeated or sort of made a truce with the Minotaur, who is just a dude in a Minotaur costume. And his reward is that he gets to have sex with this lady and he can't get it up for her. And she's all pissed about it. And I feel like that could almost have been a representation. Like, up to now, we've just seen his connection with men, with Guitone, but also with this older man who was like a captain of a ship that kidnapped him or something.
That was kind of, I'm glad you brought this up. I don't mean to interrupt, but that segment where like he gets sold off as a slave and then the like kind of, like you said, captain, warrior of the ship's like, you're my wife, bitch. And he's like, yeah, I'm your wife Mia. And then he becomes his wife. They even have like a wedding ceremony where the guy's real wife is like, yeah, wife this bitch up too. And then the best part of that is that ship gets invaded because they think like they're going to see the emperor, but the emperor's been killed. So the new emperor's troops come on the ship and like the guy's like, I'm the captain. And then they just chop his head off like very quickly.
So marriage over, very short marriage for Encolpius to that guy.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, that whole sequence is obviously as crazy as they all are. But my point being is that like, if the movie wanted to represent the idea, not just of this sexual fluidity, but that this character really was gay, right? He was really just attracted to men. That could be a way of showing that, like, oh, he's given this quote reward of having sex with this beautiful woman and he can't get it up for her. But then we go on this whole other journey that makes it seem like that's not what they're going for, because he just has to generally restore his manhood or whatever. And he does so by having sex with the love goddess or whatever. I don't know. So I felt like that was a moment where I was like, okay, I feel like I get something that Fellini is trying to say here. And then it wasn't really.
That was your problem.
Yeah.
You were trying to understand it.
Right.
I mean, I just went with it and I didn't like it. Dave, on the other hand, made sex to the movie.
Yeah, Dave loved it. So what did you love about this, Dave?
I love pretty much everything about this movie. I think that first of all, I love that quote from Fellini where he said he's examining ancient Rome as if it were a documentary about the customs and habits of the Martians. I think this movie really does look back at history in this weird alternative way. It's kind of based on what we've heard of ancient history, but at the same time, it's just a whole made up version of it all. And I think about when I think back to I wouldn't want to live on this planet even before air conditioning, you know what I mean? But try taking ancient Rome or further back, it must have just been unbearably awful. And this is just this stylized, wild version of that line of thinking about the past. And I just, that bleakness, that kind of negative view of humanity, I don't know. I just really like that.
Yeah, Dave, it's but you're oh, without air conditioning. It's not like that was something in their mind,
No,
I'm
sure.
Hundreds of years from now, they're going to be oh, cable TV.
Yeah. But no, I mean, that's what Fellini's kind of exploring how bad life might have been and just how gross it all was.
Yeah, I feel like in movies from the past, I always think about how smelly these people must have been.
Yes,
yeah, there's no good sanitation. I mean, I do think when they showed him on the slave ships, that was a good jolting, oh, this is a horrible way to have to survive and everything. Yeah, no, that's all fair. I wouldn't do well. None of us would do well there, Josh.
No, but I mean, I feel like in the case of this movie, it's so disconnected from reality that I didn't think of it as in any way a representation of ancient Rome. I mean, it is more like Martians, like you're saying, Dave. So, I mean, to me, it didn't seem like it had insight about that time period or about whatever is in the text from Petronius, which of course we have not read. And so that it might as well have been set on Mars or set in the present or whatever. It didn't make a difference because it didn't mean anything.
Well, Josh, we know you're the expert here on ancient Rome, but
no, I don't think you need to be an expert to get that.
Well, I got to disagree with you, even though I didn't like the movie. We do know about Nero and Caligula and this bacchanalian age of excess. And I thought it was more about that than hey, look at how the, aqueducts worked or anything like that.
Well, right. I mean, and I feel like as a representation of that, it's just sort of tedious. It's I mean, if you're just looking at this as pointing at depravity, we really get that very quickly. And then it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And because it's so disjointed, it doesn't build to anything. There's no progression because there's no story. There's no character development. It literally ends in the middle of a sentence, which of course is meant to be representative of the source material because it hasn't all survived. It too ends in the middle of a sentence. But I feel like if you don't know that, it just shows you how the movie, like Jason, what you were saying, where you could leave for 15 minutes and come back, it wouldn't matter. You could jumble up all these scenes and rearrange them and it wouldn't matter.
I agree with that. I mean, Josh, I understand this movie about excess is too excessive for you and its use of excesses. But I got to say, the ending, and again, I didn't like the movie, but we watched it and there are definitely parts in the movie where there are no subtitles where there should be. And we're like, what? Come on. What? We thought we found a bad stream, but it's just Fellini fucking with us, it seems like. And I kind of like the ending, not just that it ends in mid-sentence, but then you go to what would appear to be present day. And it's just frescoes of all of the characters we saw in ruin, and it's just showing how decimated it is. And, this is what happened 2,000 years ago. And one day they're going to listen to awesome movie year like that.
Yes, absolutely. I love that ending too. And by the way, I found a lot of comparisons between this and Ken Russell stuff, and that ending is exactly like his movie Gothic. So
yeah, it wasn't surprising to me, Dave, that you love this given your love for Ken Russell, and not surprising to me that I dislike this so much given my dislike for Ken Russell films. I mean, it did certainly remind me of Listomania that we talked about on this show, but also Gothic, which I have seen too, and is another like sort of pseudo true story where it starts out, you're like, okay, I can kind of see how this relates to reality, and then it just goes completely off the rails, and none of it has any relation to reality whatsoever. I don't know. I feel like I maybe I even like those Ken Russell movies a bit more. Maybe. I don't know.
There you go.
Well, I think, Dave, do you have anything else you want to say about it, or should we just rate this out of 5? I don't want to rate it out of those things.
Yeah, I think we'd just be getting deeper and deeper into the perversions and all that shit on screen. Let's just get to the rating.
I mean, are there any perversions that we mentioned the cannibalism, we mentioned the beheading, we mentioned Richard Simmons. Some guy gets his arm chopped off and replaced with a golden arm early in the film.
That's a really good moment. Yeah.
There's that.
I mean, they three-way the lady, at one point in time.
Yeah. I liked the wedding on the boat that Jason brought up. I like that the priest or whatever is like, you're going to have to put aside your love of young boys to get married.
And that's not right. Isn't it the guy's actual wife who's conducting it who says that?
Yeah, I think so.
Right.
I think so.
Yeah, but that is, I mean, I think that goes to the matter of fact idea of like, this was just fluid sexuality. It was like, you had sex with young boys, and then you had sex with women, and maybe you had sex with this old guy, and whoever was around, you just had sex with them, apparently.
Oh yeah.
Either way. So all right. Let's just rate this out of 5 5 severed arms, maybe. That's a tamer thing to offer here.
That's about the tamest, yeah.
All right, out of 5 fanny paddlings, Josh.
Right.
I gave it 2.5 on Letterboxd because it's tough for me not to respect a beheading and cannibalism in a film. But as far as enjoying it, it was a 2 for me.
Yeah, honestly, I give it a 1.5 out of 5. I just really disliked this. And the more it went on, the more I disliked it. I had to take multiple breaks during this film. It was really a chore to get through. And I think with you, like with you, Jason, at first I was like, okay, I can respect this. Like I could tell I wasn't going to like it, but I sort of appreciated the craft of it. And as it went on, that didn't even really do anything for me. So definitely my least favorite Fellini I've seen thus far. 1.5 for me. Dave, how would you rate this?
I will take 4.5 fanny whippings for this movie.
Yeah.
To see those, you'll have to sign up for that Patreon again.
Hell yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. All sorts of naughtiness there. We'll come back and talk about the legacy of Fellini Satyricon. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about Federico
69.
Fellini. 69
for this movie.
Exactly. We didn't have any 69s in the movie, though. That was one depravity we did not depict, I don't think, right?
Josh, are these things even, some of them are definitely depravities, but some of them are just creative sexual positions. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, they're having a good time. Sort of. I take that back. They're not having a good time.
Yeah.
No, that's the point, is that they're not having a good time at all, in fact.
Yeah. The poet was the fat poet.
Rich poet. Yeah. He was, and he got to enact his own funeral and make people say nice things about him. And his life was good. Of course, though, he's the one at the end, he dies and then tells people to eat his corpse.
Well, not people. His slaves, he said he'll free them and give them all of his, riches if they eat his corpse.
Right. Yeah, we don't know how he dies, but maybe it's natural or whatever, because otherwise, he doesn't seem that old. So, but otherwise, yeah, he has a pretty good life. But most of the people here.
I don't know if you saw. I think he shoved a Coke bottle up his ass, Josh, and it exploded inside of him.
Yeah. It's a lot of urban legends in this film. So we've talked about Fellini before, as we said, in I Vitelloni, which was an earlier, is from 1953. And this is later in his career, but he is still like this major international filmmaker. And after this, still has a number of really well-regarded films that are coming up in his future, including Amarcord and Roma and Casanova, none of which I've seen. I think Amarcord is the most famous of those that came after this, but lots of really well-regarded movies. Worked all the way until 1990 was when he made his final film. He was nominated for 17 Oscars, won 4 of those, as well as a Lifetime Achievement Oscar. So regardless of what we think, clearly one of the most important filmmakers of all time.
And what a mic drop quote, Josh, right here. When asked why both the leading roles were played by foreign actors and not Italians, Fellini replied, because there are no Italian homosexuals.
That's another aspect that we didn't talk about. And, I think we probably did talk about this in the I Vitelloni episode, is that not only Fellini, but basically all Italian films from this time period, they're post-dubbed. That's just the way it was done. And because of that, they're able to do like what Fellini does here, which is to cast actors of all different nationalities and have them speak their own languages, right? So they don't even all speak the same language on the set. And then it's dubbed over later on in Italian. And one of the things that apparently Fellini did with this film is, even for the actors who are speaking Italian, he deliberately made it out of sync for all of the dubbing as another way to kind of alienate the audience. And it's definitely off-putting. I feel like it's off-putting anyway, but it's even more so here.
That was the thing that got you.
Well, it was one of the things. So, as you said, the main actors, Martin Potter, who plays Encolpius, and Hiram Keller, who plays Ascletus, were not Italian. Martin Potter is British. Hiram Keller is American. And neither of them really went on to much of a career. They're unknowns pretty much when they were cast in this film. Both of them had kind of small supporting roles. Martin Potter worked on a lot of TV until the late 80s. Hiram Keller worked just through 1982, and he died fairly young. Martin Potter is still alive, I believe, but I couldn't find anything else that he's been up to since kind of retiring from acting. Max Born, who played Guitone, has no other acting credits. So really, this is, Fellini just kind of plucking these people out of obscurity, using them for his purposes, and then dropping them back into obscurity.
Yeah, I think the guy who played Lycus, who we mentioned, is the dude who married his slave there. He has worked on a lot of films. He worked on La Dolce Vita and The Detectives with Fellini, but he's also worked with Godard, Josh's mortal enemy, Louis Malle, and Michelangelo Antonioni and Buñuel. So he's done a lot of work there. Danielle Luna, who was the woman they three-wayed, was the first Black woman on the cover of Vogue, and she did some underground films with Andy Warhol.
Yeah, there's some of these people in these lesser parts who are more well-known. Capucine, who's a French actress who I recently saw in some American film, like a film noir that I randomly watched on the Criterion Channel, and she wasn't very good in it, but she certainly had a long career. And Magali Noel, who we might have mentioned when we did our episode on Z, who had a small role in there, and she's been in a ton of stuff. So, some of these people who fill out the supporting roles, but the central characters really are these people that Fellini just kind of, again, grabbed because maybe they had the right look or whatever, and just sort of placed in his tableau, and then they went back to not really doing a whole lot.
Hey, Dave, there was that time I asked Josh, I was like, hey, do you like Capucine? Is she a good actor? Do you like Capucine? And Josh said, Capucine? No.
Mm-hmm. Halfway through that, I knew where it was going.
Capucine? No. Ha Fellini.
Maybe she's good at other things. I just, that particular movie that I saw her in, and maybe also because it's an American movie.
What's New Pussycat?
No, it was not. I'm looking now,
Is it the Pink Panther?
Trying to remember. No, she's been in a lot of these. It's called Walk on the Wild Side, from 1962, with one of Jane Fonda's earliest roles. And yeah, the movie overall is not great, but it doesn't help that she is a bit awkward in the part that she's playing as the sort of love interest. But no, I'm sure she's fine in other roles, and probably better in French films in her native language than she is in American movies, I would imagine.
Espresso.
Thank you. Thank you, Sabrina Carpenter. I feel like we should watch The Clowns also, so we can spot Richard Simmons again and see what he was doing in that one.
I would like to anyway. As I said, I'm vastly under knowledged in the Fellini field, and The Clowns is a big one.
Yeah, I think I've seen 5 Fellini movies, and I feel like it's enough for me. But at the same time, there are some pretty major films of his that I've not seen, and maybe I'll get around to them eventually, but probably not unless we do another Awesome Movie Year episode. At this
Send in
point.
the clowns, Josh.
Yeah.
Who plays Fellini in the Pauly Shore Richard Simmons movie?
Oh man, that is a good question. Roberto Benigni, maybe.
Sure.
Who worked with Fellini. I think he's actually in Fellini's final film. Their careers kind of overlapped there toward the end of Fellini's career. But
I feel like if it's Pauly Shore, he'd probably get like a comedian like Joey Coco Diaz, who's just New Jersey Italian, to play him. And
Sebastian Maniscalco or whatever.
There you
He's
go.
going to play Fellini. Yeah.
There you go.
Brilliant, really. So
now you go fuck the boy.
I can't wait for this film. You got Pauly Shore in like a fat suit to play young fat Richard Simmons with de-aging. It's going to be a masterpiece, that film, right?
So I recently worked a comedy club, and Pauly Shore was working the club a few weeks later, and I went to hang out. And Pauly Shore grew up in the Comedy Store, as we know. Mitzi Shore, his mom, and Sammy Shore, his dad, big legends of that. And Pauly Shore always talks about how he grew up around all these other comics and all this stuff, and in the green room with all these other comics. And of course, now that he's Pauly Shore, there's a rule: no one's allowed in the green room unless you're part of his entourage. So everything that he benefited from, he refuses to let others benefit from in that regard.
What Fellini-esque things are happening in that green room that no one is allowed to access?
Weasel, 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 weasel.
Okay, this has become a Pauly Shore episode, so I think we need to wrap this up. That is Fellini Satyricon, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can check us out online and on social media.
AwesomeMovieYear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Satyricon, the platform. I'm Jason Harris Comedy on all the things. Eat This Comedy. We got more shows coming up in Vegas and beyond. Follow me on Letterboxd. Go for Jason.
You can find some old things from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on X, Twitter, as well as on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this film or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know your thoughts on any of the movies we talk about.
And let us know if you watch this one on LSD.
Absolutely. Tag your review LSD as well. And see what you get with that. And also, you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And we already mentioned the Patreon a couple of times this episode. So check out the Produced by David Rosen Patreon with bonus content from Awesome Movie Year, Piecing It Together, and my music career at patreon.com/bydavidrosen.
We appreciate the loyal supporters on the Patreon, the small but hearty group.
You think this movie's hard to follow? Wait till you hear Dave's music.
Oh, man. Jason, what's in our next episode?
Hey, Josh, everybody's talking about the movie in our next episode. It's Midnight Cowboy, the Best Picture winner. It's the Nielsen song, Josh. That you looked at me like I confused you. Everybody's talking. Wow, 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 wow. It's in the movie, man. Wow.
Hopefully,
wow,
Jason's gotten that out of his system and he won't be singing. Tune in next time for Midnight Cowboy. Thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
I just sneezed. We'll leave that in. Fellini!
So,
Satyricon!